All right. Yay. Hi, Ted.
Hey.
I am here with Ted Wallach, who is a colleague and friend and fellow lover of circle process. I'm super excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Steph. It's really great to be here.
Yeah. So you are a coach and circle keeper. I know that you have a wide variety of passions, but kind of there's this part of you that this area where we relate really deeply, which is this love for supporting people in circle process. I know we're both coaches, we're both circle keepers, and I think we have this kind of shared passion for how we're supporting people in this way. So you do work with men in Quantum Warrior. You do one-on-one coaching. Is there anything else that I'm missing? What else do you do?
I'm writing a book called How to Get Fired because I'm an expert at getting fired. And I feel like if you're an expert at something, then you can write a book about it. And I might have just finished the first draft of the last chapter.
Start with the end in mind, right?
Well, no, I mean, I think actually finished all the chapters and I think I just finished the last chapter, but I'm not sure. It's hard to tell, but it does seem like that might be the case. And I think it's pretty good. I think I'm pretty happy with it. So, so far, so good. So I wouldn't call myself an author, but I would say a guy who wrote a book soon.
Okay, I love it. Wow, that's actually a lot of work. Good job. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
How long has it taken you to get to that point?
Well, in some ways it's taken like 5 years, but in some ways it's taken 6 months. So it sort of depends on when we say start happened.
Gotcha. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. All right. So I want to hear a little bit about what it is that you are passionate. Like, so you have all these interests, these things that you're doing. What's the kind of golden thread here that links them all together? What is it that you're passionate about, or what are you about?
I would say that somewhere between intimacy and infinity, I get very interested in, let's not say in between, but infinity and intimacy really interest me. It's just become clear to me how they might even come together. And intimacy is something that I think that the world is deeply lacking. And I am of this world that is deeply lacking this. I think that I am deeply lacking intimacy in certain parts of my life, even intimacy with myself. I think that there are sort of 3 relationships that matter most in our lives. And that's the relationship we have with ourselves, the relationship we have with the people we love and deeply care about or even work with, and the relationship we have with all that is, whatever you want to call that. Shamans might call that spirit. Others might call that God. Physicists might call that the quantum field. It could be really however you want to speak to some kind of organizing principle of the universe and our relationship to that organizing principle, whatever that is. And I recently started studying with a new teacher. And one of the things he said is that the world has a global intimacy disorder. And I think that's why I wanted him to be my teacher, because when I heard him put those 3 words together, I thought, yes, that's exactly it. The world has a global intimacy disorder. And that shows itself in so many different ways. And the way that I feel that I can pick up a torch and head in a direction of use toward that is circle and coaching.
Yeah. Circle. So specifically circle and coaching. but it sounds like, I mean, I feel like the coaching part, that part is often, it's the one-to-one connection, which we are familiar with, right? People are familiar with that when they go to therapy, when they choose that avenue of kind of going into that private space. And it's an opportunity to turn inward in a space that feels safe, but it's usually in that kind of contained one-on-one. But circle is in this more collective community context. And so that part is actually pretty, it's different. That's a different one for a lot of people.
Certainly. I'd also say that I think my coaching, if I had to say what is the underlying code behind it,
Mm-hmm.
it would be the 3 rules of circle. And if
Mm-hmm.
I had to say what is the underlying system behind it, it would be circle.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So I think that my coaching is very much based in restorative justice practice and circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, it's true that restoration, being restorative or having a restorative approach to life or outlook and lens is actually very specific. It's a deeply rooted philosophy that not everybody connects into all the time, at least not intuitively always. But I'm curious. Well, I know the answer to this, but for those people who don't, I'm curious if you can explain a little bit what you mean about those rules of circle, and how are you comparing them? How are you kind of tying them together in both of those roles as coach and as circle keeper?
Sure. So the first rule, you can only speak when you have the talking piece.
Mm-hmm.
At first, sounds like a way to keep people from interrupting the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And that's extraordinarily important. I actually think if we simply had that and nothing more,
Mm-hmm.
or as I'm Jewish, when we do Passover, we say Dayenu, which is it would have been enough. If we simply had that,
Mm-hmm.
Dayenu.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so much more than keeping people from interrupting each other. It's also saying you have an opportunity to speak. Your opportunity is dictated by you. You get to decide when it begins and when it ends. So you are the host and the autonomous figure in your moment to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an inherent understanding that what you have to say, your truth, is essential medicine to everybody else and to you.
Mm-hmm.
And we care deeply about what you have to say. But it's more than that. We don't even care deeply about what you have to say. We care deeply about how you say it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the truth is, I don't even know that it matters what you say. It's really the energetic quality of the how that you bring into the sharing. And so your share, which unfortunately is a word that has gotten destroyed by anti-social media, because share doesn't mean what it means. It doesn't mean sending a picture to somebody. That's not sharing.
Right.
It can be, but often isn't. But to speak from your own experience in this present moment and allow whatever is coming through you and arising in you and share that. And for us all to be captive, maybe that could be considered a negative thought, a captive audience. But in a way, we are a captive audience. We have agreed to listen, and to listen in such a way that we are holding what you're saying, not trying to understand it, but simply trying to hold what you're saying so that you can do this work of speaking your truth.
Mm-hmm.
And we think that's radically important. And I would say that that's exactly what coaching is, or that's exactly what coaching is for me.
Yeah.
It's that I'm saying to somebody, what you have to say is radically important, and your truth is very welcome. And we are trying to find your truth. And unlike in circle, where I'm simply going to listen, in coaching, I'm going to reflect back to you what I heard you say so that you can hear yourself in a different way, which that doesn't happen in circle. And that's maybe why I coach as well as do circle, because circle, as infinitely powerful as it is, it does have its limits. And I've been finding them. And I think actually in some ways, because I'm finding the limits of circle, I'm appreciating circle even more. At one point, I thought circle could solve everything. It can't solve everything. It can solve a hell of a lot, but it can't solve everything. And I think actually that's a good thing because it's a very specific tool for a very specific purpose. And that's what makes it powerful.
Interesting. Okay. So many paths I want to go. I'm always so appreciative. So Ted and I work together. We are circle keeper trainers together. We host groups of people who are interested in becoming circle keepers. And one of the things I appreciate about you so much is your ability to put this what feels intangible into language. So thanks for saying that. There's so many paths I want to take here. But just to kind of go back, we were saying the three
Before you go
rules.
back,
Yeah.
I want to appreciate you and say that first, I really appreciate your saying that because it's really important to me to be able to put language to what I'm saying. And I want to add that I find when I'm speaking with you, my ability to put language to these concepts that you and I care so deeply about is enhanced, empowered, inspired. Actually, inspired more than anything else. It's inspired. And I enjoy so much being able to do this kind of talking and thinking with you because I know that because of the quality of your listening and the quality of and your particular love and interest in what we both care about so much, but also because of the quality of your listening, which I think is another very powerful part of circle. And please.
Yes, no, perfect. I love it. I know it's a good team effort. I appreciate it so much. I feel like in my life I have been, I was away overseas for so many years and I came across this circle process and it was always in my world, in my head as this like deep passion where I would look around the world and be like, kind of like you, where I'm like, but this could use circle, but everybody needs to be in circle. This is the, and I've not met so many people that share that same passion. So you and I trained together and had a pretty transformational experience in that training. And I think that has impacted things a lot, but it's that kind of shared understanding of what's actually really going on beneath the surface that I think fuels this passion for both of us, which is really exciting. So it's a good team there. We have a deep appreciation, both of us. Yeah. Okay. So we said, number one, there is a talking piece. That's rule number one. What's the second rule?
The second rule is the talking piece only goes in one direction. And the way I understand that is it's not that everyone's voice is equal, but everyone's voice is essential. That we really believe that all who are part of this circle, and the circle is a metaphor for an organization, for a group, for a tribe, for a family, for a nation state, for all kinds of things, all who are involved, that their voice is essential to being able to create the most integrated, most transcendent wisdom opportunity through this portal, that we can't do it without everyone. And everyone is welcome. Or Clay Shirky wrote a book called Here Comes Everyone. I love that title. Here Comes Everyone. Or, and actually I'm just coming to land on this, my new teacher, we'll call him the rabbi, Dr. Rabbi Mark Gaffney, but we'll call him Mark. Mark says that the new name for God or spirit or quantum, the quantum field or the one field or whatever you want to call it. Actually, he first says the God you don't believe in doesn't exist. And I don't believe in him either. But there's a field of value that we all aspire to, or that we all know is there on some level. Or the Tao is probably the best way to put it if you're aware of Taoism. And he calls that the infinite intimate. And I love that because it's got infinity and intimacy in it together. And in a way, it's paradoxical because it's like, well, how can it be infinite and intimate? That almost falls apart. And yet it's at the moment of, I was actually trained in the paradox process. So the first thing I did in moving into this kind of work was to train in the paradox process. And what we came to realize in the paradox process is when you get to a paradox, you know you're at the moment of wisdom or the moment of real possibility of transcendence. It's in the paradox. So the infinite, the infinite intimate is the name of God, but he takes it one step further and he says, the infinite intimate knows your name. It's like, now, I don't have any direct experience of the infinite intimate knows my name, except when I was just describing the second rule of circle to you, I started to think, if we're saying that everybody in this circle, this portal to the infinite, that everyone's voice is essential, in essence, what we're saying is that everyone's voice needs to be known. Everyone in the circle needs to be known, not understood, because understood is different, right? So understood, the way I understand understanding, is I was sitting in a circle with a Japanese mother. It was her turn to speak. It was a parenting circle. She spoke in Japanese. I didn't understand a word of what she said, but I feel that I know what she said. And she seemed to feel known. And so if everyone in the circle feels known, then we have connected to something larger than us. We've transcended.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So why does it go in one direction?
The reason it goes in one direction is so that the next person to speak is not the next person who wants to speak or who, quote, has something to say, as if not everyone has something to say, but instead to make sure that each voice gets heard, and not in the order of who is interested in speaking, which is often extroverts, people like me, but that every voice gets heard. And you don't have to think about when am I going to have an opportunity to share. You're going to have that opportunity exactly at the time that comes in the circle, which makes perfect sense because it's in order.
Yeah.
And so therefore, if we're speaking, if the talking piece only goes in one direction, then everyone knows when they will speak. Everyone knows that they will have an opportunity to speak. And we can let go of all of that jockeying for position and hierarchy, which can happen in a conversation.
Yeah. There's so many parts to that, right? Like that reminds me just about restorative practice, right? And the whole philosophy of restorative justice is that we're kind of leveling the playing field. We're saying, okay, everybody in the collective who's impacted gets to be here, gets to be heard, and we're changing the power dynamic. And so whereas most of the time in life, and I see it all the time, I am an introvert, and I will definitely not be the one who speaks up unless I have the opportunity that's actually given to me, right? If somebody says, if it's there and it's like, okay, it's my turn to speak, I have tons to say. I have lots that I want to share. But if I have to actually do a thing with other people who are faster and quicker and louder and bigger and bolder than me, I'll just sit back and listen. I just won't do it. So there's so many times in life where I feel like I'm kind of in the background, and my wisdom, my feelings, my perspectives, my lens on things are not necessarily given space for. So this is this particular way of saying this has nothing to do with who's quicker and faster and bolder and louder. It has everything to do with the fact that every single person that's in this group matters and your voice needs to be heard, which is also, we talk a lot about this. Even, well, I guess it goes to the third rule, but that when you decide not to speak, if you decide not to speak, which is your right, even that says something. So even the decision to say, I pass, you still had a voice in that moment. You still had a chance to speak something, and you were not forgotten just because you didn't, or yeah, sort of left in the shadows just because you didn't. So I know that's what it brings up for me, but that
I
part,
love that.
the part about even not speaking then says something. You're still seen in your not speaking. You're still heard in your not speaking.
Yeah. And in a way, actually, it means that your silence can be heard, which it's really difficult to think of other circumstances where silence can literally be heard. I was actually just listening to Dr. David Hawkins, who wrote Power versus Force, which was actually given to me by Elizabeth. And he was talking about how in Power versus Force, he talked about how you can calibrate for true or false. And what he realized afterward is he realized that it's not that you're really calibrating for true and false. You're calibrating for truth and when truth isn't there, which isn't quite the same thing, right? Because the idea being that when truth isn't there is, it's not false. It simply means truth isn't there. Like electricity isn't flowing through the wire. Nothing's flowing through the wire because it's off. But you can't offer your off. You can't show off. You can show off, but you can't show off.
Right.
In this particular case, you can show your silence because of the nature of the shape and context of the rules and the game itself of Circle. It lets you show silence.
Yeah. And in circles I've been in, again, this happens more often with kids, but when there's a lot of, unsafe, you're kind of like feeling out the situation. You're not really sure about your peers. And I used to do this work in schools a lot. So it takes a while to get to that place where you feel really safe. There's a lot of passing, right? Like I pass. But even that act impacts the group. So even when you're not saying anything, it's the not saying something, but still indicates, has a huge amount of communication around it, right? What it says is, I mean, not always, this is not a fair assessment for anybody who passes. It's people do that for a lot of different reasons, but in a lot of those contexts, especially with kids, it's a signal that like, we're not quite in the safety zone yet. And when you have one person who's kind of backing out, or you have somebody who's not really choosing that, like to lean in a certain way, it communicates something important about what's happening in the circle. So again, it's like, there's freedom to do it and it's all good. It's all welcome. It's all okay. But it's more that you're sort of understanding about what's happening underneath this simple process of passing this thing around and around. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I haven't had that experience. And actually, when I speak to people about Circle, or when I'm showing people Circle, I typically say the third rule, you're always allowed to pass. I almost never see anybody pass, but I think the fact that the rule is there actually protects everybody. But the way you describe it when you talk about working with kids is really fascinating. And actually, the one place I do see that is when I do Circle with my young boys. My 9-year-old, he'll pass all the time. And that does mean he's still included. And I need to remember that sometimes I think I get, I don't want to say upset. Well, maybe I'm upset. I get sad that he's not sharing, as if I think he's not getting enough out of Circle, whatever I think he needs to be getting out of Circle, because, I'm his dad and I, want him to have this particular experience. And I realize from what you're saying that actually the fact that he is passing means he's still taking his seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
He's still part of the process. He's still
Mm-hmm.
in the game.
Yeah.
And so I need to readjust my thinking about that and realize that his pass is as meaningful as what he might say.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the third rule, right?
That's the third rule. One other thing I would say about the third rule, although it's not specifically about the third rule, but I was playing with this recently. When I get the talking piece, sometimes I'm quiet just to hear not just to hear the silence.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredible silence. It's a different kind of silence than nobody's talking.
Mm-hmm.
It's the silence where everyone is listening,
Mm-hmm.
and they're listening intently. And it's not that you can hear their listening, but you can feel their listening.
For sure.
And their listening is palpable and real. And it's nice to not interrupt it for a moment
Mm-hmm.
and allow it to sit there and be like, wow, not listen to that listening because you can't hear it, but feel that listening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very true. it's there's something very empowering, very powerful about just the experience, like the energy of knowing that you are being seen, even when you're not saying anything. That just being like, okay, I'm alive, I'm here. There are these people who are just holding this space for me, holding the silence, holding it while I figure out what it is that is on my heart, that what it is that wants to be spoken, until I feel it, and then I'm ready to share it. And all these people are committed to just putting their whatever it is, love, attention, on me as I figure that out for myself, because hopefully we haven't been sitting there. I guess this is part of what we're going for, is that you're not necessarily sitting there thinking like, okay, what's the story I'm going to share? What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? But actually that moment when it comes to you, that you've been listening so intently to other people, that when it comes to you, you're like, oh, okay, so in this moment, what is it that I want to say? And it can take some time to really feel that in yourself. So yeah, having people hold that space while you tap into yourself and while you access your own heart, and whatever needs to be spoken, is very powerful.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you can always pass. That's the third one. And then we have this unofficial fourth one. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. So the unofficial fourth one is speak from your own experience. And when I was in a training with an indigenous elder who had been in, 45 years of circles or something like that, or probably more than that, actually. And they didn't tell us that rule. And I thought, don't we need to hear that rule? And then I said, well, what about, speak from your own experience? And they said, whose experience would you speak from? And I thought, that's fascinating. And then what I realized is, in further asking about this, their language doesn't even allow for the kind of non-speaking from your own experience that our language does, because our language, at least English, is a conqueror's language. So it has certain, like, not violence, but it's got conquering terms in it, where you get to sort of own somebody else's experience and share it yourself. Whereas the language that this indigenous elder had come from didn't even have the, I think, pronouns, for example, you, that allowed for that kind of conversation. So there's no reason to even suggest speak from your own experience, because, as they said, whose experience would you speak from? And the answer is, you might speak from a lot of people's experiences, actually. And often people do, as I am right now. And I think there's the speaking from other people's experiences individually, or speaking to them, which is called crosstalk. And there's also the global speaking, which is sort of voicing your opinions about things in the world that aren't actually your experience of those things. You're not sharing your experience of those things. You're sharing your opinion of those things. And well, I actually said this directly in the last Circle for Men. I said, your opinion is not welcome here. This isn't where we bring our opinions. This isn't where we bring our data or our conjecture. This is where we bring our experience. And those two things aren't really the same.
Did you find that was something that people could grasp pretty quickly, or does that take work to
a good question.
understand?
I don't know. I mean, I had the talking piece when I said it, so nobody really responded as they couldn't. So I think people do get it. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that does help is when we tell people, one way to speak from your own experience is to say, when Steph said this, it made me think of this in my own experience, because if you use that language, it really helps you come back into speaking from your own experience and sort of protects you from taking over someone else's experience.
Yeah, it's such an important one. And I do think, I mean, I agree that I think it's in some ways just an unconscious kind of way that we're trained to do things in life, right? It's like, oh, well, this person is saying something sad, and so now I need to get into their energy field and actually like see if I can manipulate their experience so that they feel better, or so that I feel better about how they're feeling, because it makes me uncomfortable that they're crying and having a hard time. So it's this really, it can be very difficult. I find for a lot of people who have been trained that way, like this is what happens when you're in relationship with people. You take care of them. You know, say and do things to try to make the situation different, or to even verbalize that you are in it with them. But in Circle, we are specifically not doing that. And for me, that's one of the most important parts. I feel that in my life, I am so sensitive to the projections of others. I've been highly trained to be feeling what's happening outside of the world, to know how people are feeling, to sense it, and then to make sure that I shift and change. I mean, and I don't do it consciously, but it's this pattern that I've developed over time where I can shift and change to make sure that I'm sort of like meeting the needs of the people around me. Circle is so powerful because it's this one particular place where I don't have to feel anybody else's shit. I just have to feel mine. And all of these people are there just to let me feel mine. So it's incredibly important for me. If I'm sharing from my own lived experience, the last thing I want in Circle would ever invite, and in fact, it would make me feel unsafe if I felt that other people were going to start interacting with what I'm saying. Like, oh, Stephanie, I'm so sorry that you feel that way. You know, like all of those kinds of things, although they're well-intentioned, actually take away the power of the individual to really just experience their truth and to have that truth be known, not to take it away, not to change it, not to shift it, but to just have it be. This is what's true for me. Let it sit. Let it be held. And then let the next person share their truth. Doesn't matter if it's the same or different or whatever. We're not interacting. We are holding space for each other. So we do the inner work. So yeah, for me, that crosstalk thing, giving any advice, I mean, I will immediately feel, I notice in myself, that's an immediate movement into feeling unsafe. If I say something and then somebody's like, oh, well, you know what you could do is blah, blah, blah. It's like, I didn't ask for your advice. What made you think? And also that's not the advice that I want, right? So it's like, I have to somehow interact now with your experience of my truth. And I just love, love, love and value that so much about this process. To me, it's almost, well, yeah, anyway, it's all important. But that's a big one for me.
You said something really interesting. You said, even though we aren't interacting. And I thought, isn't that interesting? We're not interacting. We are creating powerful intimacy. you would think that intimacy needs interaction to create, to be created,
Mhm.
and or interdoing in some sense, right? There must be some doing together
Mm.
in order to create intimacy. And what I realized from what you're saying is, no, actually, the doing isn't what creates the intimacy. It's the interbeing that
Mm.
creates the intimacy, and the intersharing, or the inter something else. But it's not the doing. It's not the acting. It's
Yeah,
not the performing. Yeah.
that's super interesting. I really like that. Yeah, I'm gonna
I didn't realize that until you said it.
yeah, interacting, and that's exactly what happens. It's like, oh, let me put on this role so I can make sure that, we do things that make everybody feel a different way. But really that's not what's needed. And it's true, because what happens, you get people, I mean, right now I'm running this challenge. I have, a number of people who have never met each other. I mean, this is what happens in Circle. But immediately, right, we've cut through a whole first layer, a whole number of layers that we have to usually deal with in human experience. We're like playing around with our exchanges and trying to feel out if we're safe. And I just love it. And it never ceases to amaze me how quickly we drop down, right? You've got perfect strangers. We don't have to interact at all. And in this moment, you get pulled into this space where everybody leans in just a little bit because everybody else is, and you tap into that part of you that's been so longing to be seen. You are there being witnessed by other perfect strangers, and you're not interacting at all. They're not friends outside of this. They're not talking. They're not, I mean, in this case, we are having a Facebook group, but in general, it's like you're not necessarily, going out afterward and, getting to be friends. You are just in this space together that's being shared. But there isn't an overlap of responding and connecting in the way that we traditionally do. But it's amazing how quickly people do it, in this. It's oftentimes, I feel like, a lot of the time people are like, oh, what is this circle thing? Like, I don't know if I can do that. That's new and sounds really scary. And why would I want to talk about my feelings? But every time, the minute we're in it, people are like, oh, it's this space. Like, oh, I get to talk about this part. Like, oh, people are actually listening to me. It's really hard to show people, or to, I mean, I don't think I need to convince people. I think when you're ready, you're ready. But to kind of be able to speak to the absolute power, but just also the sort of knowing. I think when we're in it as humans, it's this kind of, it's tapping into this space that we know, that we want. I mean, I guess it's that intimacy, where we're longing for it, and we don't really trust it. We don't see it in our day-to-day lives. We don't actually experience it. So if you say, come in with a group of people, it'll be intimate, you're like, okay, screw you, I'm not doing it. But the minute you're in it, it's like, this is what I've been wishing for so long. Anyway, that's my experience. And again, people are perfect strangers.
It's true. I wonder if the reason that people don't want to share when they first hear about Circle, not when they're in Circle, but when they hear about Circle, is exactly the same thing you were describing, which is when you share and people get involved in what you're saying, now you feel unsafe, or you feel it's unpleasant to have shared and to share. And I wonder whether people's reason for not wanting to join Circle, for example, we have a difficult time getting people the idea, like, why would I do that? Or, I know I have a friend who would be really good for that. It's never them. Is because maybe they're afraid that somebody will interact or step into what they're sharing, and now they'll have to be in this broken boundary space. And they're so used to that, I would imagine, that they can't imagine that we could create a bounded space.
Well, I
Because
guess
really,
so.
like, how often are you in a bounded space for communication?
Mhm. Right, never. But to me, the other part of it is actually this felt sense of safety, both internally and within relationship. I just feel like so, I mean, again, this is the same with breath work as well. You know, in that case, we're really focusing on the safety, the somatic work of learning how to become safe and to feel safe in your own body. But I just don't even think we have a lot of people don't even really recognize the deep sense of unsafety that they feel in their own bodies, but also in relationship to the world around them. So what you're asking people to do is to trust that there can be an experience where they can feel safe. And most of the time, and I mean almost all other contexts, I don't think there is that sense of safety where, well, you mean I'm going to sit in this group and then I'm going to have to, it's the only thing that I can think of, and maybe I'm not thinking creatively enough, but the only other context where I feel like there's this kind of safety is in something like AA, like that style where they have similar, it's not the same kind of structured like we are doing, but it has similar flavors to it, right? It's like the passing, or you're kind of going one at a time, you're not cross talking, that's a big part of it. And that is really sharing vulnerable things and kind of connecting on a deeper level. So I do think there's some connection points there. It's not the same. Um, but other than that, I don't feel, maybe it's just me, but I would argue it's not just me. Um, that we are so familiar with being unsafe that to be invited into a place that we say like, come be in this safe space, it's like they're like, screw you, why would I do that? Like we don't even realize how far away we are from it. But that's the other point, is that once you get into circle, you realize that it's actually created for you. It's meeting, when we take the time to do the values and assessments, it's an involved process of making sure that whatever it is that you need to be safe actually gets to be part of this experience. And we create it so that those agreements, that container reflects the needs, the heartfelt needs of every single person that's in it. And that's completely radically different than anything we experience on normal life. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
it's about safety for me. People don't come because they don't believe it's safe. They don't even know what safety is.
Yeah. And as you're saying it, I'm thinking to myself, I think I have a sense of what safety means and what we're talking about, but I also can appreciate that sometimes safety sounds ridiculous because it's been paired with physical violence, like physical safety, like thinking in terms of physical safety. So then I'm thinking, well, what's another way to say what we're saying? And what I think it is we're not used to speaking with real autonomy and knowing that we're simply going to be taken at face value. Is that what it is? And not dissected in some way, not questioned about what we're saying. I think that part of the thing about a global intimacy disorder is also a belief that if we can separate things enough and get enough data and get specific enough and get enough information, eventually we'll reach some kind of utopia. And I think what we're coming to find is that the more data that gets created, actually, potentially, well, actually, I can say this for sure. The more data that gets created, the more in danger we are as a species. That seems to be true. And I would also say that the more data that gets created, and I'm speaking about metadata and things like that, the more data that gets created, the more judgment, the more observation of that kind, the more I think we're actually unhappy. I don't think we actually, I don't actually think that all this data is making us happy. I think it's actually tearing us apart.
Mm-hmm.
It's making us separate.
Yeah.
And I think the circle is about making us not separate, which is interesting because at the same time, the circle is about separating out our ability to speak,
Mm-hmm.
but not by separating us. It's separating, it's creating space for us to speak our truth,
Mm-hmm.
separate from the other truths, and also weaving them together with the other truths.
Mm-hmm.
There's a paradox in there too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love it. I just love it so much. Ugh. Okay, so I know we're gonna have to log off here in a second, but I'm so appreciative of this conversation and of everything that you're
Me
sharing.
too.
Um, all right, so what would you say? I mean, we had a conversation recently around circle as a tool versus circle as medicine. I don't know if this is too big of a question for the end, but I loved, I think you kind of framed it that way, circle as medicine. Well, if somebody were to, let's say, okay, so right now I'm working with burnout. There's, lots, I feel like everybody is basically burnout. It's like we're so far away from our truth, from our authenticity, from our true purpose, from our inherent value, that we are, walking a path that's way over here when we're supposed to be over here. To me, that's kind of where burnout is. So I am, wanting to incorporate circle process as part of this healing for this experience. Why would circle be a medicine? Can you see or speak to why circle would be a medicine for somebody who's in that place in life of burnout, of being out of alignment with themselves?
Certainly. I think that there are really two states of being. There's a feeling of connected and a feeling of disconnected.
Mm.
And everything else is a shade of one of those two things. Or you could say there's the feeling of freedom and the feeling of contraction.
Mm-hmm.
Ease and flow and contraction, something like that. And what I would say is that burnout is a deep feeling of disconnection
Mm-hmm.
from that feeling of from that ease and flow that we get from working in a sustainable fashion. I don't actually think that we have a problem doing a lot of work, whatever that means, or, well, that's a whole other conversation. But I would say that when we are working in a way that is feeding our needs and what matters to us and our interests and our unique self.
Hmm.
That's one of the rabbis' words for, some people would call it soul, but unique self is that unique essence of the evolutionary process that each individual is. When we don't feel like we're part of the bigger evolutionary process and we feel burned out because we don't feel like we're part of something, then circle quite literally makes you a part of something and puts you into a space where your part matters again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think in some ways burnout, like, your part all of a sudden doesn't matter, or at least it doesn't matter to you.
Mm-hmm.
And things not mattering is a really big deal. What I've come to see, I mean, this is Viktor Frankl's point. This is how Viktor Frankl got through the Holocaust in one piece, is by making sure that he stayed deeply connected to meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we lose meaning, we don't feel we're connected to all that is. We don't feel we're connected to the bigger whole.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't feel we're connected to something larger than us, then we can burn out. And circle, almost by definition, creates an opportunity for you to not only be a part of a bigger whole, but an essential part of a bigger whole.
Mm-hmm.
You're necessary. When you don't show up to circle, the circle suffers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As the rabbi puts it, when you don't show up as your unique self, the world suffers.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that. I don't feel it deeply yet. It's the same idea of the infinite intimate knows your name. If the infinite intimate knows your name, in essence, what it's saying is that the process of evolution needs you. And as the rabbi puts it, your unique story is chapter and verse in the evolutionary story, which is also a love story, but we can talk about that another time. And that's the rabbi's big theory, which really connects with circle beautifully, because in essence, what it's saying is everyone's unique story is essential, and everybody in the circle is given a gift by hearing everybody else. And if they don't get to hear somebody in the circle, and I don't mean that because they pass, because that then they do hear them, they hear their silence, they lose out.
Mm-hmm.
They're less than they could be.
Yeah. The other part that's coming up for me right now is around, this idea of connection and how you see it's an opportunity to see yourself mirrored in the lived experiences of others. So I think you begin to see, this happens every circle that I have. People are like, wow, I relate to everything that everybody just said. You see yourself in the collective and you see how everything is intertwined, right? It's this space to actually be able to see ourselves in the face of another person, of a perfect stranger. So again, even though we're doing our own work within that context of the container, we're in our own bubble doing the work that we need to do. We are relating to the stories of other people. Not relating, but we're seeing ourselves reflected in the stories of other people, and it shows us what it is that we maybe aren't seeing in our own lives. It's really beautiful. And again, we can do that in a one-to-one context as well, but there's something really important about being able to do that in community, in the collective. Like, you are part of this bigger thing. And I might not have seen you walking down the street and assumed that I had anything to relate to or to understand about you or any way of connecting. But in circle, you see how intertwined it is. Like you said, without you, it doesn't work. It falls apart. It's so awesome.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hear that a lot in circle. My personal experience is I do hear other people speak and think, wow, I can really see that. I haven't had that experience where it goes around and I feel like everybody lands for me, but I know that people have that. And I think that's a limitation in me, not a limitation in the circle.
Yeah.
My inability to see the one way you could put this is the many faces of God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I love that. Well, and again, it's this, there's just so many layers to it. So we could keep talking forever. I'll wrap it up here, but this idea of kind of speaking what needs to be spoken in the moment. The other part is that, and also why we go in a circle and it has one order, is that when somebody says something, I might have the inclination to want to relate to that specific thing or to want to respond, or that it sparks something in me immediately. And that would be my inclination. Oh, I want to interact with this thing. But as the circle goes around, you hear everybody else's responses. You're listening to all the perspectives, all the lenses, all the lived experiences. And so that by the time it comes back to you, what you might have originally wanted to say or what had originally come up might be very, very different, because you've now seen yourself reflected in all of these different stories. And so in that moment, when you're speaking that truth that's relating or that's kind of coming from this experience of listening to everybody else, and you speak whatever it is that needs to be spoken, it's also that thing that everybody else needed to hear. Right? So when we're all doing that, we're all tapping in, we're saying, okay, I'm speaking from the heart, I'm saying what's present for me now. That's the thing, not only for you as the speaker, but the thing that from everybody else's angle, they also needed to hear. It doesn't work when we're saying the thing that we think we're supposed to say. It works when we say the thing that needs to be said. And that can be influenced by what's also been the truth and the heart space of others before and after you. So it's all beautifully intertwined in this way that is medicine.
Yes. And I think what you just said really sums it up beautifully, that the medicine truly comes when we don't say what we think we want to say, but when we say what needs to be said. Then we're connecting to something that's more than our ego or our separate self. Mm-hmm. We're connecting to something that is part of the whole.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I know we need to log off here. We should definitely keep talking about this stuff. I love it so much. So Ted and I work together to do Circle Keeper trainings. That's one of the big things, how we're connected right now. If that's something that people are interested in, you can reach out to us. But Ted, I'm curious if people so your Quantum Warrior is with men specifically, right? Those are men's circles.
Circle for men, yes.
Is your coaching with men too specifically, or?
I coach men and women.
Okay.
What's the specific way that I coach is supporting people with those 3 relationships that we spoke about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what
I'm really focusing
themselves, with the people around them, and with
all that is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And if somebody was curious and wanted to get involved in the work that you do, either with Quantum Warrior, if they're kind of wanting that experience for the masculine, the work in the masculine, or coaching, where would they be able to find you?
I don't have a website on purpose, as I try to stay off the grid as best as possible. So the best way to reach me is ted@enterportal.se.
Okay, I can link that as well if you're all right. So that would be the way to connect with you. And then what about with Quantum Warrior? Is that kind of the way in with that?
Same way to connect with Quantum Warrior.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Right. So is there anything else you want to say? Anything kind of final words of wisdom? I know we'll have more conversations like this in the future for sure, but just today, is there anything else that needs to be said before we say goodbye?
This was wonderful. I really love talking to you about this. I think that the insight you bring and the inspiration you bring to me when I speak about this material with you is invaluable. And so I thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to be here and for being my friend and for being my colleague and kind of trying to get this work into the world with me. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we will be in touch, and yeah, if you're interested in connecting with Ted, make sure to reach out.
Okay. Wonderful. Take care, Steph. See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.